So today in the Teachers Television we have Dr. Susan Barfield from the United States, who is also a Fulbright specialist who has arrived here in Vilnius Kolegija, University of Applied Sciences, Vilnius, where you, as I understand, you taught intercultural education for future teachers, as well as researched and prepared a book on the integration and on learning of the Roma people, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So firstly, I would like to ask you to explain more. What is intercultural? What is a culture? How do we define it? First and foremost.
I think a culture is a group of people with common beliefs, sometimes common religions, customs, traditions, sometimes dress, that oftentimes is passed down from generation to generation.
So, for example, does culture only depend on ethnic background?
No.
Or can it be, I don't know, a culture of a school and of another school? How can we define that?
Well, also I think traditions and customs come into play with culture. But no, I don't think culture is just ethnicity at all. In fact, one person can have many different subcultures that they're involved in. And what I mean by that is, I could be United States, an American, which is impossible to define culturally, I think, but I also could be culturally relevant in a religious aspect, or I could be culturally relevant in a school environment. Yeah, I think it isn't defined just by ethnicity or race.
So in a context of a classroom, we can have many, is it true that we can have then many cultures in one single classroom? We have male and female, we have students, we have Lithuanians and other ethnicities, such as the Roma, or maybe Lithuanian Polish, Lithuanian Russian, or even, as we spoke before the interview, children who come back from foreign countries to study in Lithuania.
Yes, you can. Absolutely.
And what is then intercultural education, or multicultural education, as you call it in the States?
I think that multicultural education is it's trying to promote the idea that different perspectives aren't necessarily bad, and that we look at those different perspectives. We may not always agree with those perspectives, but we respect those perspectives of others, and to give, I think, our society in general, our global society, the idea that it's good to know about a lot of different cultures and that we can learn from other cultures.
And as I know, you talk from a lot of experience. You have worked in more than 40 countries on topics.
Well, I visited more than 40 countries. I probably have worked in 10 countries, where I've spent more than a month, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 5 years. So, yes. So I have worked and lived in many different countries. I don't know if you're interested in what they are, but...
Yes. What are those countries? Because I know that you have worked in the United States with indigenous people who and the curricula, which I would like also to know more about.
Okay.
But also in Chile and Slovakia and maybe...
I was in Japan for 2 years. I taught in the Netherlands for a semester. And I taught in Germany for 5 years. So, yes, I've been kind of around the world. So I get a lot of different perspectives. Exactly.
So from your point of view, because you have seen all the world. I mean, from Japan to Chile, it's the whole map is covered. Are there principles, are there things that are common to all of those countries when we speak about intercultural or multicultural education? Is there something in common between all of us?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that when you talk about humanity in general, that especially when we're as teachers trying to teach about acceptance and tolerance, that all teachers, that's part of their duty to try to do that. So I think that is a global idea that would probably be everywhere. Now, whether it's happening or not is not necessarily the truth.
But then maybe we could talk about what is happening and what actually works in all of those different countries, or maybe even in Lithuania, because you have also worked here for a short while. So maybe there are some principles of intercultural education, or something that you from your experience you can see that it works if you only do it, if you only try.
Well, I think the most significant impact is if the teacher is open for new ideas and open to other cultures. And I say that because in how I have traveled and in observing classes and talking with teachers, sometimes the teachers are not open to learning about other cultures and bringing other cultures into the classroom. So I would say from the success of intercultural education or multicultural education has to do first with the teacher. And then after the teacher is excited about it and wants to share that with the students, then the students will become more multicultural and more accepting of other ideas.
So as a teacher, what should I know? Where do I start? If there's a pupil in my classroom from any different background than mine, where do I begin?
I think that's a great question. And I think first would be trying to find out and talking with that student and talking with the student's parents, and then researching and finding out a little bit about that culture. One of the things that I think is very successful for when you're trying to make a child who is from a culture different than the majority culture, to make them feel comfortable in the classroom, is to learn even just a few words of their language, of good morning, how are you, etc. I'm glad to see you, have a good day. All of those things that are very basic, I think makes that child feel significantly different when he walks in the classroom. So, for example, in Chile, we have a minority population called the Mapuche. And the Mapuche, if the teacher has words of Mapuche in the classroom, that is called Maputungun, that's the language. If they have those posted around the classroom, right away, children, that's the first thing they came in and noticed, oh my gosh, my language is on the wall. So if you have 3 or 4 different languages, let's say you have Polish and Russian and Roma, okay, and you have Polish and Russian and Roma in your classroom, that says, I value your culture, I value your language, and look, it's on for others to see too. And so I think that's like an example that might bring the students to say, yes, I'd like to come to this classroom.
And how important it is for a teacher to go even further, or maybe to talk to the pupils themselves, the parents. What maybe are other ways of researching? How can I know more? Where can I find them? Because there's might be some things that I don't even realize about this culture. Maybe it's a new culture for me. Let's say a Japanese pupil comes to my classroom. So where do I find more than asking the pupil and the parents?
I think you can look online, and I do, and I think you can find a lot of information there. I hesitate to say that in that sometimes online you don't know if that information is correct or how correct it is. And again, I want to emphasize that because you read that this Native Americans do this generically, that doesn't mean that that specific family or that specific child does that. So there isn't really a generic, just like I don't think there would be a generic Lithuanian. You know, all Lithuanians are this way, all Lithuanians are that way. But sometimes we do that with minorities. We say, oh, the Roma are like this, or we say, oh, the Mapuche, they're like this. I worked for 20 years with the Native Americans in Montana, my state, in the United States. And one of the first things I discovered was that there was not a generic Native American. But there are different tribes with different languages and different customs and within Montana. And so to say, oh, all Native Americans are this way, I learned very quickly that's not the case. So to answer your question, it's difficult, but I think as you get to know the child and the parents better, then I think you will discover things. Let me think of an example. I called a student in, a Native American student, and I asked him I was talking to him, and he was looking down at the floor. And I thought, well, this isn't good, you know, because we look at each other when we speak. And afterwards, I talked to my colleague, the Native American person that worked in my office, and she said, no, because you were the professor, he was the student, and you don't look at him. You know, that's not the right custom. So I interpreted that first initial meeting as he was a little disrespectful because he wasn't looking at me. And in reality, he was being very respectful because of that. And yet, I can call another Native American into my classroom, and they will look me in the eye. So you can't say that it's this way for everyone. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we need to find out what works the best. And oftentimes talking to parents helps. Again, I was saying about learning a little bit of the language to say, good morning, Mrs. So-and-so, how are you? How are your children? I think that makes a very big difference for them. Parents, particularly in minority cultures, have not had good experiences when they went to school. So they don't have a real positive outlook of schools, oftentimes. And so they're afraid to come to school because, one, they don't speak the language sometimes, and it's intimidating to them. So maybe getting sometimes interpreters there to help for meetings, and to also tell the parent, you know, I may make some mistakes. Please let me know if I am making any kind of mistake because I don't want to offend you. And oftentimes you will have to find out later that you made a mistake. Sometimes they won't tell you, but a lot of times they will tell you.
So if I understand you correctly, it is very important for a teacher to reach out first and to show that you are accepted here, we are awaiting you here, and please come in and feel at home. In this
as much as
you can.
Exactly.
Because, for example, in the case of Roma people, a lot of the parents that are now bringing their children to school, they might have experienced maybe pressure to attend, or maybe just maybe a lack of interest in them, and that's why they might not want to come to school because they have left it too early. But in this context, especially, the parents are our main allies if we want for the kids to attend school and for as long as they can.
Most definitely, and in fact, I think one of our objectives for this Fulbright that we've been working on is to find a way where parents would see their culture represented in the school, where children would see their language and hear their language in the school. And so this is one of the projects that we've been working on with the Vilnius College, University of Applied Science.
Could you please tell me more about
I
this?
will. I'd be glad to tell you more about it. We're going to, we are almost done with, actually. We decided that one of the best ways to bring children and to see their culture in the classroom is to bring part of their culture into the classroom. And of course, our duties as teachers are to teach reading and writing and basics academics. And so to say we're going to do another lesson on top of what I'm already trying to teach, teachers are just like, I have too much to teach already, so don't give me more. So we said, what is it that we can bring in that will cover the concepts that I'm going to teach anyway, but will bring culture in at the same time? So we decided to find out what what children would be interested in, and children love stories. So we went around and researched what story, this is for the Roma culture, what story would children enjoy hearing that we would be able to expose to all children, not just Roma children, but all children in a classroom. And we found a story. We went to daycare centers, to Roma community centers, and to schools that have Roma students. And we read that story, and then the children illustrated the story. So I've just brought a couple to maybe so you can see some of the illustrations that we're using. Let's see. And we had 4 daycare centers, community centers, and schools participating. And so we got all kinds of pictures, and we made the pictures into a book. So we have, the book is in 3 languages. It's in Romani, it's in Lithuanian, and it's in English. And it's on an e-book.
So it will be possible for other teachers to also find it online? And
It will. It's going to be for everyone to access. And the book has the children's photographs, and then it has, each page has the 3 languages on it. And we narrated it so that if I am an English teacher and I want to use, want my Roma students to hear Romani, I can click on the picture, or actually it's a Romani flag, and it's narrated in their language. Or I can click on Lithuanian and it's narrated in their language. So this allows, even if you don't speak the language, it allows you to bring that language, it allows you to bring the culture in, and it even allows you to have the community involved because they did some of the pictures.
Could you please give us some more examples maybe on how we can integrate a topic into a subject, let's say in mathematics? How can I include Roma or any indigenous ethnic minorities?
You could.
And mathematics. Is it possible?
Okay. For example, I'll give another example for mathematics. If you looked at South African Zulu beading, but you can take the beads, and there's so many concepts that you can use that for. With just young children, you can teach colors, numbers, you can talk about sequence, you can talk about patterns. And so if you have these beads, and you pick a roll of beads and you say, this is a yellow, a white, a black, a yellow, a white, a black. And then you ask the children what comes next. And if they see the pattern, then they've got yellow, white, black. Or if you, in mathematics, if you have 1 bead and 6 beads, you have 7 beads. Or if you have 2 beads times 3 beads, it's 6 beads. So you can use the beads for multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. You can use it for sequence. You can use what's going to come next. So if I have 1 bead, and then I have 3 beads, and then I have 5 beads, what would come next? 1, 3, 5, 7. 7 beads. And those are odd numbers, but see how they learned a sequence?
So
Okay.
is the idea that I teach what I need to teach, but I just choose to make the topic about, I don't know,
How I
or
teach it,
or
it's,
how-
yes, how I teach it, because I brought in the beading and talk about South Africa, and actually in the Zulu beading, the beads, the colors have significance. And you could talk about that, and the children can make necklaces, they can make bracelets, you can have them do mathematical formulas and then give it to their neighbor, and they have to figure out what the answer is or what the formula is. And I actually have used this with algebra in 7th grade or in secondary school, where the beads represent, like, one colored bead represents X and one colored bead represents Y, and you use it for algebra. So, I mean, you can use something as simple as these beads for very complex formulas.
So it just requires some creativity, but then if you see any possibilities, you can just choose it as a topic and integrate the cultures that are maybe in your classroom, or maybe even unknown, such as Zulu, that I need to find out.
Okay,
more.
and I have to say to teachers, you have to have a world map in your room. I just think it's so important. So if you, instead of getting like the new sweater or the new, dress for Christmas, ask for a map, like a world map, because I always say you need a world map in your room, so that when you're talking about different cultures, you can look at the map and you say, here we are in Lithuania, here we are in Vilnius or Kaunas or wherever we are, and this is where South Africa is, or this is where the Native Americans in Montana are, or this is where the Japanese are. And I think that's very important to bringing in that culture. It only takes 30 seconds to do it, but all of a sudden the students are hearing different countries, different ethnicities, different cultures.
And then we know how far we are from them or how close we are, and maybe especially in the world that is now so connected, it's very easy to find and to see, for example, our school is like this, but how is the school in South Africa? Maybe it's not that different from our school, and see what we have in common as well as different.
Definitely.
So talking about differences and similarities, I know that you have worked in Slovakia with the topic of Roma people and their education and integration, as well as here in Lithuania. Are there differences, are there similarities between our countries? And because we have Roma people, the same ethnicity, but are they different?
There are differences. I think there's a lot of similarities too. They are a private people, and they are proud. Family is very important to them. Retaining their language is very important to them. And sometimes I think in both areas, but I'm not an expert in Lithuanian Roma because I've been here only a short period of time. But what I've seen so far, and have visited, as we said, 4 different environments, actually 6 different environments. What we've seen so far, it seems there is a similarity in their suspicion of schools. I don't think that they have had excellent educational backgrounds, and their experience in education hasn't been positive in either place. So I think that is a very similar thing for both of those cultures. The difference, though, that I see, one of the differences that I see, is that I don't see a lot of parents in Slovakia that when I say, do you want your children to graduate? Do you want them to, get an education? Oftentimes they were like, no, it's not a Roma education. That's a Slovak education. That's different. And some of the parents that I've talked to here have been more receptive, have said yes, that they are interested in that. I think part of the difference is that if we can get those parents to see that the experience for their child during the day in the classroom is positive, I believe that the attendance would improve. And I think older students, the same thing. If they saw that their culture is more valued, I believe they would feel more comfortable coming. No one wants to come to something where it's a negative thing during the day for them. No one wants to be called names. No one wants to be excluded. And I think that's part of society. We do that. And unfortunately, that's something that we need to work on as a community, as an educational community.
So one thing that I would also like to elaborate a little bit more, you have mentioned integration, word integration, and we as a society, we want to have all these cultures integrated. Is there, I don't know, a scale of integration or inclusion? Is there a spectrum from assimilation, I don't know, to what are the words? I don't even know if I have the words to say that. Is this?
I think what you're asking, maybe what you're asking.
From to what?
Are you saying that that where in the continuum between not assimilating at all, being
like segregation,
segregated by yourself, to assimilation, where do we fall?
Yes.
Where should we fall?
Yes. Where should we try to? Where should we aim?
Okay. Well, not a lot of people agree with me on this. But I'm going to say one of the reasons I feel I was successful in Montana with the Native Americans. I was working at the university level. I went into my university classes and I was like, where are the Native American students that are going to be teachers? Because we didn't have very many. So I did research and I found out the reason. And the reason they're not in the universities is because they're academically lower, even if they graduate from high school. They don't have the money because in the United States you have to pay for your education. And they're culturally excluded from their reservation or from their community, and so they feel they're by themselves. So we got money from the government, and we got money for tutors, we got money to help them pay for their education, and we got what we call a cohort. We got a big group where they were working together and they were all Native Americans, where they had a place they could be together at the university. This was a very successful program. It did take them a little longer to graduate, etc., but it was very successful. After 8-10 years, we graduated 40 new teachers. What's exciting about this is that those teachers, for every year that we paid for their education, they had to give a year to the school where there are Native American students. So they are role models for those students that says, I can do it and education is important because now here I am in the classroom. I don't see that we're at that spot here in Slovakia or in Lithuania. We don't, especially with the Roma culture. And so I think we need to move it all the way down to where we're talking about primary and secondary, primary even, to keep them in school so that they will go on to be able to do that. So that's part of, I guess if I were looking and saying part of that assimilation, I don't really believe that you should assimilate that culture. When you assimilate a culture, you lose the culture. They're put into a different culture. And I don't believe that's the answer. What I believe the answer is, what happened with the Native American students, I told them you don't have to choose one culture or the other. You can be bicultural. So you can be a strong Native American, have the customs, go to the powwows, use the language, but you also can be a strong American in the U.S. schools. And so this is a little controversial, but I believe that in order to make a really good environment, you need to keep that Roma culture, but you also need to know how to get along in the other culture. How to survive in the other culture.
So is it being a Lithuanian Roma or a Roma Lithuanian?
I don't know that you have to.
Is it possible? So is it possible to have two cultures within one person then? And
but we talked earlier that there are many cultures within a person. So yes, I believe there are. But I also believe that by being able to get along in this culture doesn't necessarily mean that you are this culture. It means that you know how to get along in this culture. That's a little different than saying I am this culture.
So you just you are a friendly neighbor probably, but to a Roma person or to another person, but you don't ask them to become the same as you are.
Exactly. I think when you start to ask them to be the same, you're asking them to assimilate.
Yes.
You're saying, I want you to be in my culture. And then that's assimilation. And I'm not advocating that at all.
So okay, so then my last question for you today is what outcomes do we get from your experience? What you can see from working in all those different countries, also with indigenous people from Montana, and why should we do this? What does it give to maybe the mainstream culture to have these differences, to value these differences?
Well, I think any culture that wants to progress and to evolve wants to listen to different perspectives. And I think that as a culture, in order to do that, you need to be more accepting and tolerant and learn other things that are I think that are important. You don't always have to agree with them, but I think listening and respecting the differences is really vital. Not necessarily accepting those differences as part of your culture to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. To be able to do that.
So thank you very much for this interview and for spending time in Lithuania and for working on this subject on the topic of the Roma people integration. We will be looking forward towards the book that you will be issuing and for teachers to use in their classrooms, whether they do have Roma people in their pupils in their classroom, or maybe
even if they don't. See, I think the book will be very beneficial for everyone, not just for those teachers that have Roma students. And in the book, we have an introduction that talks a little bit about Roma culture. And I think that's important that, to be in there. And at the end, we have like 10 lessons of how to use the book in your classroom. So as a teacher, if you just read the book and then look at the very end, it has all kinds of ideas of how you might be able to use it in the classroom.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.